Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mesoteric and our continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA D10 Nano project. And on yesterday's Nintendo 64 update video, I hinted that I was going to be doing another video Friday afternoon for you guys because Robert had put some new features into the core that were going to be amazing. That is what this video is. Now at the time of recording, it is not publicly available. It was just posted on the MiSTer Discord Nintendo 64 channel because it is kind of a bodge. I will explain more what that means shortly, but this core is amazing and let's take a look at it. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe, all that jazz. But you've seen the peaches fly over a couple different times on the channel now. Every single time I show it to you, it gets better. But one of the big improvements to this core is to the reality display processor, because for the longest time you've been seeing Mario jump out of this tunnel and run around in-game with absolutely no face, basically a creepypasta come to life. Well, our plumber friend has his face right now. We will get back to Mario in just a moment though. The big huge thing on this is Ocarina of Time, the Master Quest version, is running on the new core. People have been playing, people have been getting into it. It's possible it freezes somewhere down the line, but the last time we showed you Ocarina of Time, you were only able to get into it with a debug level select and it would freeze in like 10 to 15 seconds at the most. Now with the new core, you can basically just play Ocarina of Time however you want. Just be aware it might freeze 2-3 hours into the game, it's still testing. But I will say this is one of my favorite moments in both playing and covering MiSTer FPGA. Seeing a classic Nintendo game that I've loved as a kid, something like Ocarina of Time, just working on the core is absolutely spectacular. It is crazy to think that like 5 weeks ago, this game just basically didn't work, nor did anything else. Nintendo and SGI had an entire team of engineers working on this hardware. We have one Robert in Germany banging these updates out basically every 24 hours now. The level of detail he puts into his work, the ability to even do this in the first place, I give him a 10 out of 10 on this core and it's not even done yet. But honestly, just seeing this run on the screen is amazing. Link is going to get his sword and you can continue on the adventure. This feels on a lot of ways like getting this game new when I was a kid for Christmas back in the day. Seeing it pop up back on screen gives me the same nostalgia feels as it was when I was basically like 13 years old. It's just so incredible to see this happen in real time. And I will say, as you can see from the footage, texture filtering is on. Some effects are still missing, and you'll see there when we pick up the stick there is a bounding box around it that shouldn't be there. But the Great Deku Tree right here looks exactly like he's supposed to look within that fog. And honestly, I've always kind of thought this might be Tom Selleck. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what actor you think that is, because I see a lot of Magnum PI in this tree. All jokes aside, you can get this far in the game. And like 3 days ago, you could basically see this and it would freeze. The level of improvement that keeps happening is just so fun, and you can get inside the Deku Tree as well. It's just so interesting to see the evolution of this core. But this looks, sounds, and feels like Ocarina of Time. Outside of there being some crackling in the sound, I'm not going to give you a sample, not until it sounds a little bit better, but there will be other audio samples in this game. But I still can't stress enough just how impressive this is. It does feel like the first time playing this game. And tell me down below, did you have a Nintendo 64 when you were a kid, or did you get one later in life? I love keeping track of those things. But even the flame effects on the wall and on the stick look really close to accurate, and I can't wait to see how this game runs in updated cores. I played Ocarina of Time maybe 3 years ago with my wife from start to finish, and now that it's working on MiSTer FPGA, once the core is done, I'm 100% going to end up sitting down and playing this game again. Every time I get into Zelda, it just makes me want to play even more, and playing it on this core is doing the same thing. Now another huge game that never worked before but does with this SRAM bodge core is going to be Resident Evil 2. This is not just a technical marvel running on FPGA, it's also a technical marvel that the developers and porters that took this job from Capcom were able to get the entirety of this game onto a 64 megabyte cartridge, including the full motion video in the beginning and throughout the game. This is a masterclass in game development as far as compression techniques are concerned, and I really don't think many people could probably get this entire game to 64 megabytes today. But it's a ton of fun just to watch FMV video running on the Nintendo 64, and this is one of the few examples of actually having it working in the core. That's why I wanted to show it to you guys here. It's one of those things, if I didn't show you the FMV, a lot of people would leave comments down below asking if it worked. I can tell you now that it does. And again, these are testing request videos and some things I want to see as well. So if you have any game you want me to try that I haven't shown recently or at all, leave me a comment down below and tell me what that is. But again, seeing full motion video on the core is amazing, but it feels wrong as well because this is the Nintendo 64 and it barely had any full motion video. But as we get into Resident Evil 2 here, you see everything looks correct outside of that strip of pixels at the left-hand side of the screen. Clearly not supposed to be there, but you can play it. It looks good, it controls as good as tank controls ever did, and it sounds great as well. Go ahead and listen to the voiceover and music for about 35 seconds. I'll come back and show you a ton more games that just work incredibly well.
Freeze! Who are you? What are you doing here?
Hold your fire! I'm a human!
Sorry about that. I thought you were one of them.
What's going on in this town?
Hold on.
Now you might notice that some of the audio dialogue is a little bit muffled, but don't forget there was heavy compression used for basically everything in this game, so you can't really say where the sound issue comes from. It is a lot of that compression, but obviously you can play the game. It is definitely difficult, and we're just going to sit here and stab some zombies. Andy D helped with some of the captures on the video this week, and he's stabbing like a fool. But it's just so wild to see this game running as well. This is another one of those games that hadn't worked whatsoever up until about 4 hours ago when it finally came to life, or in this instance came to death, because you are fighting zombies. We're moving back over to F-Zero. This is the IQ version. We now have textures on the ground. You can actually see the course around you. And I know that made one user of the MiSTer Discords, Mario, very, very happy. He comments F-Zero on basically every video I make, including if it has nothing to do with F-Zero. But this is just running perfectly in my opinion. It's fast, it's fluid, it's responsive, all of the screen space effects that I remember are there, and this is what it looked like a mere 36 hours ago. Absolutely no track whatsoever, to having a full track textured flying around the screen. This is one of the fastest paced Nintendo 64 games there is, and it is one of the best racing games on the platform as well. I've never been a huge F-Zero fan, but playing it more on the core, I'm definitely falling back in love with it again. I'm way more of a Sega fan, but I 100% understand why people love this game now. And it is just such a vast improvement in like the last 36 hours. You go from this, and you regress back to that a mere 3 days ago. It is so wild just to see the course, but I kind of like the fact that you can't see the course in certain spots. It's basically like playing the game in hard mode. You don't know where any of the boost pads are, you don't know where you can heal your ship. It actually makes the game much more difficult, and in a lot of ways that makes the game a lot more fun, especially if you remember absolutely everything about it. So maybe save those test cores in your MiSTer like I do, so you can jump back and forth to different variants. So if you decide you want a super hard mode run of F-Zero, you can 100% do it. But just zooming around the course, seeing this run in its full speed, it is a 10 out of 10. Again, it's a game that you can just sit down and play, and if you weren't pixel peeping, you'd probably have no idea that you were playing this on MiSTer FPGA versus original hardware. You might know because the image quality is much better than a Nintendo 64 on a digital TV, even with an HDMI mod in my opinion. But I am curious, who here has the HDMI modded Nintendo 64? I never actually did it to mine, and now I'm so glad I haven't because I don't have to anymore. I mean, let's not kid around, I'm probably going to do it anyway just because it's a project and I can do it. But getting back to Super Mario 64 here with Mario in his face, a lot of levels just 100% work, and you can 100% play this game and complete this game as is with saving, and the music is just so good. I absolutely love this track right here. Another 30-second sample and I'll be back with a lot more games.
Here we go!
Super Mario 64 is filled with iconic music, but that's gotta be my favorite track of the entire game, but tell me what yours is down below. Now, last time I showed you Bob on Battlefield, there was no ground, and then there was ground, but there was a lot of issues with the fog effect basically washing everything out. Now that just 100% looks exactly like you would expect it to if you were playing the game. It's another example of if I didn't tell you this is on MiSTer FPGA and you didn't pixel peep, you might not notice. Compared to last time, this is what we were looking at. When the fog implementation was corrected and we got the CPU cache involved as well, it went just wild. You go from something like this to just running at full speed with basically like 80% of the graphical effects laid right on top of it. And don't forget, and I know I've mentioned it before, This was done in like 3 weeks time. It is just wild to think that's even possible, but the movement is fluid. I'm playing this on a Switch Pro controller and I did slightly calibrate the analog, but otherwise just running around as Mario feels natural. This is what the intro of this game looked like 3 weeks ago. There's no filtering, there's no texture work really, all of the sprites are completely mangled, and if we go back to the intro that I showed you in the beginning of the video, this is what the look transitions to. This is recognizable as Peach's Castle, this looks like Super Mario 64, and don't get me wrong, the first example I just showed you was incredible to see in its own right. Running on FPGA hardware in and of itself was so impressive, but as Mario once again jumps out of this pipe with his full face on, with that texture filtering, with the cache running at full speed, it is just wild to see. Now moving over to Smash Brothers, this is the iQube version. Now the fan version does run, but I'm saving that for the next video because I want to get a little bit more footage. Also because Kirby in this has 4 eyes and that is absolutely hilarious. Just be aware that it has been fixed, but I just want to talk about this version because the iQube version is always an interesting aspect of Nintendo 64, and having those weird eyes in the video just is charming to me, but I will show you a clip in just a second of it running on the other version, so I have done my due diligence and told you that it has been improved. But the only reason that I do want to show you this is because Kirby has 4 eyes right there and Mario has eyes coming out of his chin. It is just a horror show in the Mushroom Kingdom in the Nintendo universe, but I will show you the good version in just a second. But again, this is a game that only worked like 48 hours ago, or more like 72 as the recording of this audio. It's here, it plays, it's the Smash Brothers you know and love, and Remix does play as well, so I'm going to give you a sample of the audio soundtrack from that so you can see the eyes in their normal position and hear the great audio. But enjoy! It just 100% sounds like Smash Brothers that you know and love, and I know this is going to be a new favorite for people on the core, because this game gets played a ton both in competitive scenes as well as just amongst friends, and honestly the cartridge for this game is an absolute fortune, so if we get Smash Brothers on MiSTer FPGA in a cycle accurate core, it is going to be so amazing in so many different respects, and I can't wait to see how this game shapes up on the next video because I'm going to be showing you different footage from the improved version. Now moving on to a game that used to show the intro but freeze and now gets in game is Hybrid Heaven. This is a very interesting and intriguing game and actually has a really good intro cutscene all done in engine. I'm not saying Hybrid Heaven is the hidden gem of the Nintendo 64, but I think it gets close to taking that crown. It's a very unique game and unlike a lot of what is on the system, and that definitely right there is Kurt Russell playing the president. I don't know why I keep seeing actors in these videos, it's just what's happening this week for me. You tell me who you think that was though. But if you've never played Hybrid Heaven, you should definitely check it out. It's a love it or hate it type of game, but again, seeing this much story in engine on the Nintendo 64 was not something we got outside of some of the Legend of Zelda games. So I love that developers here really tried to extend this out and give you a lot of backstory and a lot of intrigue as to why you're playing the game in the first place. Now when you actually get into the game, it is very atmospheric. That fog in the background does look good in this instance. It's not one of the games that has fog just for fog's sake to hide something. This is basically like if Nintendo 64 had Metal Gear Solid, but it wasn't made by Hideo Kojima, and I mean that in a compliment. It does have the same similar vibe. Now of course it's Nintendo 64, so the controls do take some getting used to, but it is fun, it is impactful, and it is running really well here on the core. And do tell me down below, did you play Hybrid Heaven back in the day? Did you play it more recently, or have you never played it before? Because sometimes I'm interested to hear what games you guys haven't played and what you decide to play after you watch these videos. But this is just a vast improvement and another thing that you can play on the Nintendo 64 core. Went from not booting whatsoever to showing the intro to being playable within like a week. And that seems to be the overarching narrative for the Nintendo 64 core's development. Things go from nothing to everything in like 7 days. Now don't forget, as this core progresses and the fixes get more esoteric or more difficult to deal with, we probably will not see the same level of speed coming out of Robert or FPGAZumSpass as he fixes those bugs. Right now things are moving really quickly, but I anticipate and assume once we get closer to a finalized core, it's going to be a situation where you don't see a new core for a week or two. That's just my presumption, but I'm saying it now. Now another game that didn't used to work and does is Snowboard Kids 2. I've obviously shown you the original Snowboard Kids already because it's one of my favorite racing games on the Nintendo 64, but a lot of people asked if Snowboard Kids 2 worked, and it does, and you'll see that it likes to change the aspect ratio in between different scenes. I did not scale that to fit just so you could see the black borders around it, something that pretty much every console for the generation did. But the soundtrack, straight fire, listen, and be right back. Just another example of awesome audio in core, and pretty much like 90% of the games that just work for me, I feel like the audio is perfect. But I am not an audiophile, nor do I claim to be. It's not my ears that I use for a living, it is my eyes. So tell me down below if that sounds good, because I know a lot of people really get deep and interested in the audio quality. But getting stuck at the end of the lift in Snowboard Kids 2 is definitely a thing that you're going to suffer from. But again, this is just incredible. Earlier this week, it didn't work whatsoever. You were stuck with Snowboard Kids, the original, and by stuck I mean graced with its absolute perfection. Now we get to see the second game that does elaborate on the first one with more features as well. So it's one of those things, if you've never played this game before, you can now play both Snowboard Kid games on the Nintendo 64, no issues whatsoever. Now everyone keeps asking me to test it. Normally I've been showing the things that don't work, but Ogre Battle 64 still freezes on the title screen. There's just some games that do not work currently. Ogre Battle 64, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, a lot of people ask me to test those, and they just don't currently work for one reason or another. Once they start to work, I'll get into a technical explanation as to what hardware implementation brought them to life, but for right now, just know Ogre Battle 64 is a freeze on the title screen. Now moving back over to Pokemon Snap for just a moment, this is another game that has been improved by the eyes. Just like Super Mario 64 where he had no face, Pikachu had a little bit of extra face. But as we go through here, just take a look as you look around, all of that fluidity, the texture filtering, you're going to see a little bit of banding in the sky, and that's because other visual effects are not included yet. But as we go by Pikachu here, he's like you remember him, being a two-eyed whatever the hell he is. If we move over to the previous core from 3 days ago, Pikachu here has 3 eyes. He's 3 Mile Island Pikachu or Blinky the Fish, and honestly I like him with 3 eyes better. It is more fun to gawk at him via photography, but all jokes aside, this is another improvement in RDP code that allows for the textures to be correct. The reason why Mario had no face and Pikachu had an extra eye is down to those little bit of features. Now let's move on to some wrestling games on the Nintendo 64, because everyone keeps asking for these, and that is because I kind of forget that the best generation for wrestling games on any home console was the Nintendo 64, and these were sent in by TR McHenry. He captured them over on the Mr. Discords and messaged me and asked if I wanted to use them, and anytime I can see Stone Cold Steve Austin climb the ropes like it's nostalgia back from the day, I'm definitely going to take that. There's so many good wrestling games on the Nintendo 64. I bought a wrestling game last year, the most recent WWE, and I did not have much fun with it whatsoever. I remember loving wrestling games back in the day, but I have not revisited these in the longest time. Something like WCW versus NWO World Tour here has Ric Flair, which means it's the best game of all time. I don't know who did his face texture, looks nothing like Ric Flair, but he's got the classic Speedo on. The Nature Boy is here, he is in charge, and Hollywood Hulk Hogan with his bald head and that long mullet around the side is exactly what I remember. The games are working, they're playing, and they actually sound great as well. It's a good situation where you hear music, sound effects, and that crowd noise all at once. So go ahead and listen for like 25 seconds, and I'll come right back with more Ric Flair because I know everyone wants to see him.
Whoa!
Definitely not the best soundtrack on the Nintendo 64, not by a long shot, but it does sound good here. And as Ric Flair puts the classic figure 4 leg lock on Hollywood Hulk Hogan with that blood coming out of his head, and this is what Ric Flair used to do, and I will say he's my favorite wrestler of all time, and I hope he lives forever. I do not want to ever see a news report of Ric Flair not being with us anymore. Now moving on to another interesting example, last time I showed you guys Hexen, it was just this black screen, but what we found is if you go down to read and write Z and start turning things on and off, you're going to get an image on the screen. This is not a perfect image, there's definitely going to be graphical corruption, but of course it's not a finalized core, so we have to expect things like that. But this has been an interesting observation. There are debug options and different toggles that you can articulate within the work in progress core that probably won't be there in a finalized core, but right now for testing do work. You can play Hexen on the Nintendo 64 today with some weirdness in some of the textures, but honestly I don't really love Hexen, it's way too maze-like for me. If you're going to play any of these games, I definitely highly recommend Heretic, but leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think about that comment. I don't do it just for the comments, I'm usually actually curious about it. But it's a fun look and a fun example of what goes on with the work in progress core, how to make things that didn't used to work, and the different settings you actually have to change things. Because Hexen is not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, it's just a very 90s game and it takes a lot of patience to navigate the world versus something like Heretic where it is level based more like Doom. This is a maze and if you love those you're going to love it, and this is a really good version of Hexen as well. It's on the Saturn, it's on DOS, it's on every console and computer known to man, but it is also on the Nintendo 64 work in progress FPGA core, and that is an improvement over the last time we took a look at the game. But of course it is a 90s FPS game, which means it is not going to hold your hand, you're going to die a lot, and it does have a very difficult opening that you need to figure out before you progress in the game. And the last game I'm going to show you is Evangelion. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but I do not watch a ton of anime. This is a very weird, very intriguing game on the Nintendo 64, and one I basically always forget exists. It does have some light FMV sort of sequences at the beginning of the game as well as inside of the game itself, at least I believe them to be FMV. But this is basically a fighting game if it was a kaiju big battle game. You'll see we have this fun intro here, but as we actually get into the game, it is just wild to look at. It's got so much style in and of itself. It is not the most fun game I've ever played, honestly, but it does have this really big sense of scale. This feels like if they made a Godzilla game for the Nintendo 64, except this obviously isn't Godzilla, and I would have honestly preferred that over something like this. But it's a fun example of a game that does exist on the Nintendo 64 because the system doesn't have the biggest library. Put the number of games on the Nintendo 64 against the Sega Saturn or the PlayStation 1, and you will see how much smaller the library was for this generation for Nintendo. So having experiences like this definitely expand the library and give you something new to play, because I'm assuming most people that are watching this video have never played this game before, but as always tell me down below. But it is a very interesting game. I love the kind of cinematic angles it takes, and the fight feels interactive. This almost feels like Battle Heat on the PCFX, except actually playable versus that game, which is nothing but a headache. But you guys asked to see this game, and I love doing these viewer requests, so honestly, if there's another game that I have not featured yet, if it works, tell me down below, and I'll make sure it makes the next video if I can get good footage from it. But Evangelion here, it does work on the Nintendo 64 core. It does have a propensity to freeze now and again, and honestly, it takes a lot of learning curve to figure out what's actually going on, but once you get there, you can have a ton of fun with it. But this is the results of the newest core as of the recording of this video. Robert says he's going to be working on it over the weekend to get this SRAM core out to the general public, and it's very possible he did it like an hour ago before this video went live. But otherwise, next time there's more changes, we'll be back with more videos. You guys keep watching these things, and I am happy to keep making them. But again, the speed of the progress of this core, I've never seen anything like this in my life before, outside of dealing with dailies on a film set. Short of that, leave me a comment down below. I'll have more videos tomorrow. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.